Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us to the Turning Trash into Treasure composting workshop today. We are both in person here at the Building Material Thrift Store and sharing this via Zoom. So please be patient with us as we struggle a little bit with wonky technology and background noises, etc. We are going to do our best to keep this streamlined and simple. We are also recording this so we can share with everyone afterwards. So Mike is here helping from an office. So he is our tech provider today. He'll be changing out slides, managing the chat, letting people in and out of the waiting room. So thank you, Mike, for being with us. And if you could send us over to the next slide, please. We'll do quick introductions of your presenters. So I will come onto video so you can see me maybe. I don't know if that worked or not. Maybe you're seeing me. I'm not really sure at this point. But hi, I'm Amy Mateus. I'm the program director for the Sun Valley Institute for Resilience and co-manager of the Wood River Seed Library. I have been gardening in the Wood River Valley since 2016, and I am currently in a permaculture design class, and I have previously done a seed school with the Snake River Seed Co-op, and I will pass it over to Mano to introduce herself.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm not sure if you can see me. Maybe not. Yeah.
Flip it around.
Flip it around. Now you see me? Okay, great. Good morning. I'm Nano Goldrow, and I'm a master gardener. Have been gardening in the valley and making compost here for 12 years. And I'm also a co-manager of the Wood River Seed Library, and also a volunteer here at the beautiful Building Material Thrift, which is in Bellevue. It used to be, you may remember the thrift store that used to be in Woodside. The thrifts moved to Bellevue, and it's a new management, and it's now under the crisis hotline with Tammy Davis as the head of this and doing really a community hub, turning this place into a community hub. And it's more than just building material. It's also lots of furniture, gardening things, and more, much more. It's a great place to meet wonderful people too.
Muted.
And sorry for turning my camera.
Thank you for that introduction, Mano. Mike, if you could go to the next slide for us, please. Okay, so just so everyone knows, 5B Resilience Garden was a collaboration started last spring due to the overwhelming excitement that people had about gardening, seed saving, growing food, preserving food, and reducing food insecurity in our community when we really saw a drastic disruption in the supply chain where food was not available on store shelves, and people more than ever were wondering, how could we start growing our own food? So Mano and I and a group of other people, including Emma, who's joined us today, put together 5B Resilience Gardens, and we started building a community around gardening, sharing resources, sharing educational events, sharing our knowledge, and sharing our passion with individuals. So we've hosted a variety of workshops throughout the last year, and this is our first in-person hybrid workshop of the year. So thank you all for being here, both on Zoom and in person. And okay, next slide, please, Mike. 5B Resilience Garden is really about any type of edible or medicinal gardening. It can be as small as like a little pot on your windowsill with a couple herbs, or a big, lush, multi-acre garden. It's really about sharing food with each other and with your family. So nothing that's commercially available for sale. That's the one thing that we don't include in 5B Resilience Garden, because it's about sharing of resources, not commoditizing food production. We have a lot of great farmers that we support in that aspect. We also have 3 guiding principles. Those guiding principles are, first and foremost, food production. Secondly is pollinator habitat. Thirdly is soil care. So we've been doing a series with the Haley Public Library to introduce people to those guiding principles. So if you're interested, we'll send a follow-up email today to everyone who participated with links to previous webinars and more information about those guiding principles. But today we are here to talk about composting. So next slide, please, Mike. Okay, so we decided to host an in-person gardening workshop around composting to really give people a hands-on experience of like, what is composting? How do you do it in your backyard? What can be composted, and really how easy it is to create a composting setup. So today in our workshop, we'll go over briefly what is composting and why it's important. Materials for composting. A lot of people have heard of browns and greens, carbon, nitrogen. Homes for microbes and food for microbes is another way of looking at it. We'll talk about types of compost setups, managing a compost pile, what's important, aeration, hydration, time, and love. Third, we'll talk about how to use compost in your garden. And fourth, we'll talk about common concerns and how to address them. Like if your compost is really stinky, what's going on and how do you manage that? Because that can be a problem for people. In our environment, another issue we sometimes have is like really slow decomposition process. And there's ways that you can speed that up a little bit. And then Manure is going to do some demonstrations, and we will have an opportunity to get our hands on some composting material. We have a bin that Manure and I built with help of other people at the Building Material Thrift. I guess it was last weekend now. So this was all used with products that were available here for free, and dedication by people who are innovative thinkers of how do we use this type of material in building a composter. So next slide, please, Mike. And now I am going to pass it over to Manure to get into what is composting and why is it beneficial?
Okay, I am unmuted and I'll start my video as well. So why we're doing composting? People may be doing composting for different reasons. My prime reason to compost is to create fertilizer, to create a rich compost to put in my garden so I don't have to buy any compost from the store. So that's my personal goal. Amy, her first goal is to divert things that would otherwise go to the trash, so it doesn't go into landfill. So you can be composting all your carbon material and your plant material, so it doesn't end up being trash, but it ends up being something fertile that you can give away or use in your garden or share with your neighbors. So now the where to do your composting is an important question. So a compost, there's a compost bin right there, and you see it's right next to a tree because it's going to be shaded in the afternoon by this tree so that it stays cool and it doesn't dehydrate too much. So it's important to find a location that's kind of out of sight and not too close to your home, but also a location that is accessible to water, and because you have to water it once in a while. And it has to be close enough that it'll be okay for you to go dump something into it. Some people think it has to be on the south side, full sun, but that might dehydrate it. In our climate here, we may not want full sun on your compost. Some people are saying, yeah, but it will heat up my compost. Yeah, it will cook it and it will dehydrate it. So you have to find a way to kind of shade your compost pile so it doesn't dehydrate and you don't have to add too much water too often. So that's the where. And now what do we add to our compost? So it's very important to start. And if you look into the compost bin, we already have put a lot of dead leaves from trees. That's kind of we could call it a bedding. It's a good habitat. Dead leaves are a good habitat for your worms and all the decomposers in your compost. So the decomposers include worms, they include pill bugs and all kinds of other bugs, big and small, including bacteria. And the same microflora we have in our gut. We actually acquire our microflora from the microflora of the soil. So everything you put in your compost bin has a flora on it. And you want to keep that alive by watering it. So one component is carbons, like a bedding or a habitat. And it's also carbon material to combine with the nitrogen that we will add to that. It also needs air. The composting is an aerobic process, so it needs oxygen to decompose. If your pile becomes compact, you need to aerate it. So that's why we need to turn it. We have pitchforks here. You can use a pitchfork and just fluff it up and let the oxygen seep in. And the other thing you need is, of course, the nitrogen, which is, in the case of home people, your food scraps. So your peels from carrots or anything, any vegetables you have in the kitchen. And here I have, this is the compost bin I use in my kitchen to collect my kitchen food scraps. And someone brought us some, are they flowers?
No, that's from my juice this morning. Beets and carrots.
Okay, beets and carrots and celery. It's the what's ever left after making vegetable juice. And here's another little bin that you can have in your kitchen, and it has a filter on top so that there's no odors. Cilantro? Okay, someone brought us some cilantro, so more greens. Great. Yes.
Food items you should not put into a compost?
Yes, there are definitely food items we should not put in a compost. Meat, dairy, fats,
Oils, like olive oil.
oils. You have to make sure that you don't consider your compost as a trash can. You have to be very selective as to what you put in it. If you put things with pesticide on it and you use it as a fertilizer, well, you have pesticides in your fertilizer. If you have material, plant material that is diseased, that have viruses, you don't want to put them in your compost because you don't want to multiply the diseases. You want to put the good bacteria in your compost.
Are you all putting coffee grounds and eggshells in your compost too?
Yes, absolutely. So I have a whole set of things here. I want to show you, as well as the little bin I have in my kitchen, I have this little tub that I keep in my refrigerator. If you don't want to keep it on your counter or you're going away for a while, you can save it in your refrigerator. You can freeze it even. So this is kitchen scraps also. And you can put your coffee grinds. So coffee grinds, they look brown, right? But it's actually rich in nitrogen. So it's considered nitrogen, green material rather than brown material. You can put lint and lint from your dryer, or hair. If you cut your hair or somebody's hair have a lot of nitrogen in it, and lint has a lot of hair in it too, usually, and my house anyway. And you can put eggshells. So I always collect my eggshells. I put them on my windowsill, and once in a while I crush them as small as I can with just my fingers or with anything to break it down. And you can put that in your compost. They're slow to decompose or to break down, so you want to make sure that they're small enough before you put them in there, but they provide calcium and phosphorus in your compost. Okay, something I don't put in my compost is bananas, banana peels and orange peels. They're tropical things and they take too long to decompose here. However, I have read this recipe where you ferment your banana peels. You just put your banana peels in water, you leave them on your counter, and it ferments for 2 weeks. And that starts the breakdown process. And it dissolves the calcium that's in the banana. Banana peels have a lot of calcium and is it phosphorus? Calcium and phosphorus. So you can put the water from this in your compost to add some of the, if it has fermented, then there's bacteria, good bacteria in there. So you put this water in your compost and you can drink it too. Yeah, you can drink it too. And you could put your banana peels in there if you want or not. Once they've fermented, they started breaking down. So, but just know that they take a long time to decompose.
What about orange peels? Can you do something similar with those, or what would you do with orange peels?
Unfortunately, I put my orange peels in the trash.
I don't, because can you pick me up? I'll come over to you because I don't want to turn my.
Okay.
So this is where like your goal, it really determines what you can put in your compost and what you can't. Mano's goal is to make a really strong fertilizer soil amendment. My goal is to divert waste. I put banana peels, citrus peels in my compost. It's slow. I might have citrus peels that are 2 years old still in there, but it's not going into the landfill. So it really matters about what your goal is. If your goal is to get beautiful, fertile compost that you can add to your beds, you might not want your citrus peels or your banana peels. But if you're like me and your goal is just to divert from the landfill, add all that stuff that's slow to decompose. The other trick that I have for decomposition is smaller material, like smaller particles. So cut your banana peels up, cut your citrus peels up. That will help it too. And worms is a great way to decompose things. No, we don't. That's what I heard. Okay. Rumors. They don't hate them. Yeah, you need them with other things. You don't want just citrus peels, but like there's stories of people in more tropical environments that have dumped citrus peels out in a rainforest and built totally healthy soil. And that is using the microbes and the insects that are already naturally there. So try it, experiment.
So I'm going to talk about the ratio of your brown materials and your green materials. So you want to start with having enough browns. So many people will only use their food scraps and then it will stink and it will just mold and it won't decompose really fast and it will stink. So make sure you have a good proportion. It's good to start with your browns and then add your greens to that.
Would you say 50%?
Yeah, in volume, about 50%, roughly. So every time I go dump this in my compost, I add about this volume of leaves to my compost pile.
I'll add a quick thing on that. In the slideshow that we put together, there's a really nice chart that talks about the carbon to nitrogen ratio of all sorts of things you can add. So you'll receive this after the workshop today. It's a 1 to 20 or 30 parts. So everything that's natural and organic is made of carbon, right? So even the things that are high in nitrogen still have carbon. It's that ratio is different. So manure has a lot of nitrogen compared to wood chips that are very, very low in nitrogen, but really high in carbon. So we have some charts that we'll share with you all to give you those scientific ratios.
And the 1 to 20 ratio is in weight, not in volume. So it's much, you're not going to weigh how much you put this and how much you put of that. So when the easiest way, the easiest rule of thumb for you is just approximately 50-50 in volume. Okay, these ratios were built mostly for commercial applications, or if you want to get really, really precise. But as a home composter, you don't need to get that precise. The other thing about home composting is that it's cold composting. The size of our composting is small, and we incrementally add a little bit over time. So the pile doesn't get hot as it does in commercial composting. They build a pile all at once with layers of exactly the right ratios. And they also, there's an airplane going by. They also blow oxygen through the pile, and then they let the pile sit for so many days, and it gets really hot. You can burn yourself putting your hand in there. And this is a thermometer to measure the temperature of your compost. And usually a home compost won't go above 90 degrees. It might go a little above, depends what you add. But after you've added something, go the next day or 2 days later and put your hand on top, you'll see that it's warm. The bacterial activity generates that heat. So adding heat from outside doesn't help it. What helps it is the bacterial activity. You want to make sure you have a lot of good, diverse bacterial population in your compost. So this is a bottle of Kefir. Good gut bacteria, right? It's also good bacteria for your compost. So this one, we said don't add dairy products or fats to your compost. This one is a non-fat, but what I do is once my bottle is empty of Kefir, I just fill it with water, shake it, and it makes a small dilution, but it has a lot of bacteria in it. And I can dump that in my compost. So you can do that with your yogurt container or with your fermentation, your pickles, or other bacteria. You can also use a compost starter. This has minerals and good bacteria in it to promote the activity of the bacteria in your compost. You can also buy this kind of thing to add to your compost when you're starting your compost. Did you want to add something to?
The other inoculation I really like to use is making a compost tea with vermiculture, so worm castings, because they have a lot of bacteria in them. So compost tea is really easy to make. You just need aeration. You don't want it to be stagnant, but you can pour water over materials like finished compost, banana peels, vermicomposting. What else? Comfree is a really nice thing to do. And then you stir it every day for a couple days, or if you have a bubbler, that's another great thing to use. But that type of inoculation is something you can make at home too. So there's a lot of at-home inoculations that you can make with any type of materials that you have.
So on to managing your compost pile. So you added your browns, and once in a while you add some greens and you add more browns and you turn it. So you want to make sure that you turn it once in a while. Or if you're lazy, you just turn it once a month. Or the easy way that I use is once a month, I transfer my compost pile into my second bin. So I have 3 bins. That's why a lot of people have a 3-bin system. You have your fresh compost in one bin, and once in a while you take that, you transfer that to your second bin, and then you start fresh again in your first bin. And eventually you'll transfer that second bin into your third bin. Every time you transfer, you're adding oxygen to your pile. So aeration is important. The other thing is you can have, when you have dead leaves or little stick, the branches from your brushes, the small stick, they create air pockets in your compost. So it's good to have those in your compost a little bit to create aeration. So the second thing is hydration. So you have to make sure that every layer gets humid. You don't want to soak it, you don't want to over soak it, but you want to add humidity. Your bacteria and the worms and the pill bugs, they all need some humidity to live in. If you soak them, you will drown your good bugs. But if you don't have enough, you'll dehydrate them and they'll die. So you have to make sure that your compost stays humid. And if you just water on top of your pile, it won't seep into the bottom of your pile. So it's important to add some humidity at each layer, once in a while, make sure that it's wet enough. Just the humidity in your home bin from your greens, that adds humidity when you add that. If you add, a bottle of this once in a while, that adds humidity. So you probably, in my pile, it's on the north side. It doesn't dehydrate that fast. But in June and July, when it gets really hot, then I have to water it maybe once a month. I don't water it that much. So we don't want to waste our water, but we want to use it wisely and make sure that we water the layers as we go along. And we already talked about inoculation. Another thing I have here that we can add, so back to adding material. So when you have house plants or outdoor plants that are in a pot, you can put your potting soil and the dead material from your plant in your compost pile. That's quite fine. And of course, if you're a gardener, you have a lot of dead plant material at some point once your plants have produced what you eat, and what's left over makes great compost material. And some plants, especially like comfrey, is great plant material to put in a compost. I personally grow comfrey mostly so that I have this material to put in my compost. And the comfrey has this ability of hosting a good bacterial population.
And it mines nutrients from deep within the soil. So when you compost comfrey leaves, you're adding all those nutrients that are hard to get because it pulls them up out of the soil, which is really exciting. If you want comfrey plants, come to the Seed and Plant Exchange this Saturday. We will have some available for people. They grow very prolifically, so be mindful of that. If you don't want them taking over, put them somewhere where they're contained.
Or dig them out every year and bring them to the Seed and Plant Exchange. This year we'll have 3 plant exchanges, and the next one is this Saturday. The one after that is May 29, and then June 12, we will be at the farmer's market. And we'll do a little Seed and Plant Exchange there too.
I have one question on what to add to the compost.
Yes, a question of what to add to the compost.
Yes. I just built 2 new raised beds in my property. They've not ever been filled. And I live in a horse community, so I was very thrilled to hear that my neighbor has 1-year-old manure in a big
Awesome.
No, because then I went over to, I know, I was so excited. And then I went over to a commercial grower here in Bellevue, and she said, do not add that because it's going to add pesticides to my plants. And I was like, oh.
We'll ask
manure.
Their horses.
I know my neighbor. Well, I don't know how to ask that. What would I ask? Would I ask if they do
ask
organic?
them if they use organic hay or feed for their horses.
Organic is the word I need.
There's organic, certified organic.
If they do.
There's also dewormers that are used in livestock managing that can.
She told me not to use it. I was like, darn. So
I
ask if it's organic.
Yeah, you have to know the quality. I forgot to mention manures. Yes. Manure is a great thing to add to your compost, and in fact, you want manure in your compost. I go out of my way to collect elk poop and deer poop and moose poop. That's organic. I'm assuming it's organic. When I take a walk around the streets in my neighborhood in the spring and the snow melts, there's all this poop by the side of the road, which will feed the noxious weeds in the spring if we leave them there. So I go with my bag as I walk and I collect them and I put them in my compost bin and they fertilize. I also use horse manure. So this is a piece of horse manure. If You know, if there are horses walking down the street and they leave their poop, or they're a festival and there's poop there at the Grange, when the rodeo is there, there's poop left at the Grange, I go and collect the horse manure and I put it in my compost. Just make sure that you add this manure to your compost. Don't give it to your plants when it's fresh. Manure has to be aged before you use it, but it's a great source of good bacteria and all kinds of good things. And yeah, not nitrogen. Yeah.
You don't know.
We could move to the next slide, Mike. Thank you. So how to use the compost. And I'm going to have to put my phone down, so I will turn off my video. So here I have my finished compost, and we can circulate that around maybe, and you can have a look. This is my black gold. There's so much work and love that goes into producing this to fertilize my plants. I use this to start my seeds in the spring, and I put it in my beds.
You mix it in with other dirt or all compost dirt? Well, it's been composted.
It's been composted. You can just put it on top of the soil or mix it in with the soil. If I'm doing seed starting, I mix it into the soil. If I add it to my garden, I just put it on top of the soil. They call it a top dress. So you can circulate that around. That is worth gold.
Yeah, smell it. Finished compost
doesn't smell like
it doesn't have an odor. But how do I get to that stage from, well, okay, from this stage? Okay, you have vegetables that are going to decompose. I put them in my first bin. They start to decompose in my first bin. And then in my second bin, they're mostly brown, but I can still recognize a few things in there. And then they go into my third bin. And then this is my raw finished compost. So this is the compost I dug out of my finished bin this morning. So you can see it has little balls of horse manure. It has sticks. It may have an avocado pit if I put it in there. It may have some other plant material that is not fully decomposed. So you can see that this looks different from this compost. So what's the difference? I sifted it. So you can use this as a sifter. Approximately a 1/2 inch hole is what I use. You can use this. You can use this. It's a French fry basket that I got from a kitchen store. It works great if you're doing if you're sifting a small quantity. Or you can use something like this, and let's do that right now. While I clear that, I forgot to show you, I have some worms in here and some pill bugs in some habitat that came from my worm bin actually, and I'm going to donate it to this bin here so that they have a little population of worms going in. The pill bugs are bugs with they're kind of oval shaped with many little legs, but when you move them around, they go into a ball and they look like a round pill. That's why they call them pill bugs. So I want to show you the sifting process. How do I get to this gold stage here? Okay, the rest can stay. Okay. So this is a sifter that I made. I'm not much of a carpenter, but I made this. So any kind of a metal mesh in here, and the frame is 2x4s. Whoops. Any reason why? Just because that's what I had. Ideally, you would use wood that is bare, that hasn't been treated. But that's what I had. So my motto is I use what I have. I would not use treated wood for my compost bin. I would not use treated wood for a raised bed, but just to sift, it's okay. Yeah, so Amy is showing my raw compost to our Zoomers. Okay, so I just take my compost. You can see that there's a lot of big pieces in there, right? This kind of compost, you cannot recognize what vegetable is in there. So it's finished enough, and you could spread it as is on your garden, especially in the fall, but even in the spring, you could spread this as is on your garden. That's fine. But if I want to do seed starting and I need the fine compost, I'm going to sift it. And you can see there's a little worm in there. So I don't want to kill my little worm, right? So I'm not going to squash it through. I'm going to put it in here, and we'll put in the worm bin directly. There's another one in there. So if I find any big thing in there, so this is manure, so I just crush it. If I find a stick that is not decomposed, I just throw it back in my first bin, and it's going to finish decomposing. So I just don't want to kill my worms, but I take a stick like this, and you just move your compost gently. This is a piece of corn on the cob. So sometimes I need, my fingers to break it apart. And more manure, and sometimes you need to just break it apart with fingers, or with your object here. You just brush it against this. And what's left over in here, I put back in my compost bin. It might go into my second bin or my first bin, depending on how big the pieces are and how far they're into decomposition. Okay. So you carry on, and I really like this mesh because it's kind of sharp. And when I rub the material through it, it breaks it down. It helps it to break down. So it's a manual process. It depends how fine you want your compost and how much you need. So you can see that the finished compost is in here. It's a fine, moist, fine moist. There still are a little bit of sticks in there. It will continue to decompose.
Another question about the compost bins. How do you keep the animals out?
Okay, there's a question. How do we keep animals out of our compost bin? The first thing is don't put anything meaty or anything that the animals that eat, the animals that are carnivores, don't put any of those in your bin. It's not good anyway, but if you put it in there, it's gonna attract pests like voles and rats, and so you definitely don't want those. So that's the first thing. The second thing is if you need to stop elk or deer, you need a fence that's 7.5 feet. If you have an open pile. And what we're doing here is we use the crate, an old crate that was here, and we put some pallets on the sides, and we wrapped some weed cloth around the pallets. And we just screwed that together a little bit and made some kind of a door. And voila, we have a compost bin. And we have a top. So you do have a top. So I pulled up the top this morning, but there is a top so that animal don't get into it. And you also want a top so that it doesn't dehydrate too fast. And if it's not a top, it could be a tarp.
In the daytime? Would you cover it in the day or no?
I would cover it all the time, except when you go to dump or take from it. Yeah, if you live in a climate that's humid, it's fine. If you live in a dry climate and you don't cover it, it dehydrates faster and you have to keep watering it. It kills the good bacterial life in it. So it's a good thing to cover it, both to protect from animals, not to tempt the animals, and also to keep it from dehydration. Yeah.
About worms. I don't know if you already touched on this, but when you use worms, is it just what's naturally already happening in there, or do you have a separate, newspaper scraps with worm bin that you add later, or anything like that?
No, I showed you a little tub with worms in it. That's from my worm bin, but that's a different kind of worm. It's a tropical worm. It's called a red wiggler. And it's a tropical worm that does not survive the harshness of the winter here. So that's used in my worm bin that is indoors. But for your outdoor bin, you want the earthworm that lives naturally in our soil. So
where do those play into your garden?
In the winter, I cannot even access my compost bin because there's this much snow and ice on the ground, right? So, and my compost bin is frozen. So I have this little 3-layer bin with worms, red wriggler. I have trouble saying that. So I keep that in my house at room temperature, and in the summer I put it in my garage if it's not too hot.
Or those types of worms are called leaf litter, so they stay closer to the surface, versus an earthworm doesn't like closer to the surface. They're deeper down. There's also other bugs that live in the compost that are beneficial, not just worms, like the pill bugs, all sorts of weird things.
Centipedes.
Beetles are great. Centipedes. Pill bugs are awesome.
Yeah, pill bugs are great.
And I will say, just to play devil's advocate to the keeping all animals out of your compost bin, rabbit poop is extremely beneficial. It is not hot. So if your goal is just to reduce stuff going to the landfill, you might not be too worried about a rabbit going in or a mouse going in. I'm not. I have rabbits that go in. They don't eat moldy food, right? They're going to eat the fresh stuff that was added, or the grass clippings or the leaves and things like that. They're not going to eat the moldy weird apple or the coffee grounds.
But they might use your pile as a habitat because it stays warm in the winter. Yeah. It's cozy warm in the winter. So like, there's always
you turn it. You don't want to accidentally get an animal on your pitchfork.
Other questions? Mike, can you see if there are questions on the chat?
Use newspaper for carbon material, right? Yeah.
Yes. So, okay, newspaper. If you use newspaper, you want to shred about 1/2 inch like this, rather than cutting. It's better because when you rip it, it creates this ragged edges, and it kind of splits. It splits the paper, and it exposes more of the paper. So it's better to just strip it like this, and you can put that in your compost bin also as brown matter. Yes, coffee filters, tea bags, the kind of tea bags that decompose. Yeah, you can put them. Thank you.
Question: in a perfect world, what is your time frame if you want to try and start a compost bin now? And the weather is good and you have enough green material.
Okay, the question is what is the time frame for my composting operation? A home compost takes 3 to 6 months to go to a stage like this. And yeah, and it depends on how often. The more you turn it, the faster. The smaller your pieces in there, the faster. And the bacterial activity, if you add you know, bacterial boosters in there, it'll be a little faster.
And then in this climate, what do you do in the winter? Does it go, you start all over again in the spring?
So in the winter, I have a 3-bin system. So when the freeze happens, I have my bins stay there full of, I have a full bin of mature compost, and I have a full bin of halfway compost, and I have a full bin or half a full bin of my other compost. So I make sure that I transfer them before the winter. Some of my mature compost has gone to my garden as a top dressing and as a mulch on top of my garden beds for the winter. So in the fall, the freeze, before everything freezes, I add that to my garden bed, and ideally before the leaves fall, because then I pile up my dead leaves on top of my garden. So I let leaves decompose directly on top of my garden. And then in the spring, I take all of the plant material in my garden and the dead leaves that I accumulated in my garden. I take all that, I put it back in my compost bin. And by then it has started to decompose. It's mushy, it's wet, it's perfect. I put it back in my bin. My bin thaws out slowly in the spring. And like today it was all melted, but yeah, it's ready when the other thing is I start seeds usually in February or March. And at that time, my compost outside is frozen solid. So in the fall, before everything freezes, I make sure I bring a bucket of sifted compost into my garage in a bucket. So I sift some compost in the fall. I save a good bucket or whatever quantity I know I'm going to need to start seeds or put in my indoor plants. I do that, yeah, because I've run into problems where I have compost, but it's frozen outside and I need to start my seeds. What do? I have to go buy compost. Oh no, the nurseries don't have compost yet in February, right? Because nobody gardens in February, so they don't have anything in February.
I know we have a question from the chat. Are there any bugs or insects that are bad or harmful to compost?
Centipedes are good decomposers, but they're also a predator to the red wriggler worm. So I don't want them in my worm bin, but I leave them in my outdoor bin. Otherwise, no, there's no, I personally have not had issues with unwanted bugs in my compost pile. I mean, once you have an ecosystem, you have a good mix of the good bugs, and
we did have
self-regulating.
Susan raising her hand. I'm not sure if she's still on the call or not, but Susan, if you're there and you want to say something.
Thank you. Thank you.
No? Okay. Okay, she is no longer on the call. So I think with that, we can end our Zoom.
All right.
And start composting here.
Yeah.